When Geronimo first got to my barn, the priority was to get weight on him and gain his trust. We focused on simple things like grooming and getting comfortable in the barn. There was also a lot of time spent continuing his halter training, but ultimately the issues he had were caused by a lack of trust in humans, so becoming his friend and showing him that I was there to help him was the main goal. While lunging, he liked to rear to try and get out of working. He was basically like a toddler trying to test his boundaries and see what exactly he could get away with. He grew out of it pretty quickly when he realized it wasn't working. We had to start at the very beginning with his training because when you spend the majority of your life unhandled, you just don't have the knowledge that a typical 5-year-old horse has. As Geronimo started getting more comfortable, I started giving him some turnout time. We started in the outdoor and worked our way up to an actual pasture as he proved he would still let me catch him. While he was in his stall, it was the perfect time to practice haltering him as he still liked to try and find ways to get out of it. With enough patience and treats, his haltering improved drastically, and within a few weeks of his arrival, he was much more accepting of being haltered. As his haltering skills improved along with his physical condition, I started focusing more on improving his lunging and groundwork. Like I said earlier, in the beginning he tried to rear to avoid working. The rearing was replaced by slamming on the brakes and spinning around, but again, when he realized he was really just creating more work for himself, he quit doing it pretty quickly. This particular day, he made it pretty clear that he was feeling much better. He was a handful, but it was fun to see him have a personality instead of being the timid, shy horse that he had been previously. This was his very first day in a pasture and getting to have friends. It was a big test for him to see how he'd interact with other horses and if he would still let me catch him out in a much bigger space than he is used to, but he passed with flying colors.
Papa, leave him alone.
In less than a month of being at the barn, his whole attitude towards people has changed. He's gotten so comfortable with everyone, including the kids. I think he's realized that he really likes attention. When Geronimo first got here, he didn't like when I touched his legs or got near his hind end. As he started getting trust, he began letting me brush his entire body as well as picking up his front feet. It was still going to take a bit for him to let me pick up his back feet, but it was a start. After grooming him, I felt like he was ready to be introduced to a saddle pad and possibly even a saddle. He definitely wasn't too sure about the saddle pad, and it took a few minutes for him to let me get the saddle pad near him. The saddle pad seemed like enough for him that day, so I saved the saddle for another day. In every lunging session, I like to do a little bit of groundwork along with it. My favorite thing to do is halt and make sure the horse halts with me and not after me. This helps them pay attention to me and what I'm asking of them, as well as improves their manners. With Geronimo, there is also a lot of desensitizing to do because he simply hasn't been exposed to so many things. I do a lot with the lunge line or lead rope and just toss it around near him or on him or simply pet him with it because he was barely okay with a human petting him, let alone another object, so it's something that he should get used to. Coming up was another big day for Geronimo, the day he got his teeth floated. We had no idea when they had been done last, if ever, and didn't want him to be uncomfortable or in pain. With this means a shot to sedate him, and we had no clue how he was with needles. He was quite defensive for a few minutes, but then decided it was okay and stood perfectly still to get a shot. I know there's bound to be some internet trainers who will see the horse rear and be like, oh my god, abuse, you are a horrible person, go die. But there was no way of knowing how he was going to be other than trying it. If he would have been really dangerous, then we wouldn't have kept going and I would have worked on needles with him by myself, but he literally settled down in a few minutes and was perfect. He's had a few other shots since he's been here, so we can fast forward real quick and look at the most recent time he was stuck with a needle and see how much better he's getting about it, so clearly something is going right with the pony. But anyways, back to his teeth. Once he was sedated, he was great and it turned out to be a good experience for him. We also opted to pull a Coggins for him while we had him sedated since his current one would be expiring soon. Once Geronimo was getting really comfortable in the barn, we ventured into the wash stall. All the trust and confidence we had been building really showed here because he walked right in and wasn't too impressed with it. I like to include the kids as much as possible with the training of the horses. It's good for the kids to learn how to handle green horses, and it's good for the horses to have someone else handle them, especially a kid. So as soon as I feel the horse is ready, I start incorporating some training with one of the kids. Today was the first day that Riley did any groundwork with Geronimo. He really impressed me with how he was for her. He was pretty good about walking at her pace and respecting her space. We spend a lot of time grooming where the cross ties are. The goal is to get him comfortable standing there on his own so that when he's ready to be cross-tied, it won't seem like a big deal. At this point, he'd gotten really good about picking his front feet up, and it was time to really start working on his back feet, especially since he needed to get his feet trimmed as soon as possible. When I started working on his back feet, I began by simply running my hand down his leg to get him used to me being back there and touching his back legs. Over time, I started asking him to pick his foot up and then immediately let him put it back down. As he got more and more comfortable with it, he started holding his leg up for longer periods of time. He also had pretty bad thrush when he got here, so if you're wondering what I was doing with that bottle, I was treating him for thrush. During this time, I continued to work on desensitizing Geronimo to things we typically take for granted that our horses already know. We worked on fly spray, continued to work on the saddle pad, and also started to work on being sprayed with water. The water will have to wait until it warms up again to continue working with, but at least we got to start before it got cold. In these next few clips, his reaction to the saddle pad, or in this case lack thereof, is what I was waiting for before I sat a saddle on him. So today was the first day he had a saddle on him. He was getting braver about things being placed on his back, but the weight of the saddle kind of freaked him out, so that was the next thing to work on. Since he was lunging much better and continuously showing that he's willing to work instead of trying to find ways out of it, I decided to ask another question of him and see how he'd do working over a ground pole. He's never been impressed with ground poles, so as I assumed would be the case, he was pretty content with going over the pole on his own. The ground pole on its own was way too easy for Geronimo, so my next thought was to see if I could build him up to a small cross rail, but I soon learned that Geronimo was really scared of those little green standards, so the idea of jumping him was nixed pretty quickly. Our new goal was just to get comfortable trotting over the pole on the ground with the scary green standards on the side. Before putting the saddle on with the girth, I opted to use a surcingle on Geronimo first so that he could still feel something around his belly without me having to risk the well-being of my saddle. The surcingle would also make the transition to wearing a saddle easier for him because it will still feel like a girth around his belly, but it won't be heavy or intimidating like a saddle. I really thought he was gonna have more of a reaction to me tightening the surcingle around him, but he really didn't care about it. In the clips coming up, it's hard to tell, but he has a bridle on underneath his halter. We haven't done much with the bridle because he really didn't care about having a bit in his mouth, so it just wasn't a priority to keep working with it. As I get closer to backing him, he'll start wearing the bridle more. After only a few sessions with the Surcingle, I felt that Geronimo was ready to have the saddle on all the way. The first time he had the saddle completely on, I only walked him around in it. After the first session, although there's no video of it, I started lunging him with the saddle. The first time he trotted in the saddle, he got a little worried seeing the flaps bounce up and down, but he got over it in a few seconds and has never been bothered by the saddle since. Soon after his first 30 days in training, I felt he would be ready to be backed very soon. He was doing wonderful. I had been working on putting some of my weight on his back and he didn't care. Unfortunately, before I ever got a chance to try to back him, I sustained an injury that left me out of the saddle for a month. This made it hard to continue working with Geronimo. Our progress plateaued. I did what I could with him, but ultimately my body needed to rest so that I could heal. The only significant work he did during this time was jump a small crossrail on the lunge line, which, given how terrified he used to be of those green standards, was a pretty big deal for him. As I started to heal and become more mobile, I started working with Geronimo again. Aside from becoming slightly pushy again from the lack of work, he didn't really lose any training. The pushiness went away after a few training sessions and now he's back to progressing with his training again. He is hardly recognizable from the horse he used to be. His overall physical and mental condition has improved remarkably. This horse used to be so frightened of new experiences that he could put up some pretty good fights because he didn't have the confidence to give it a shot. Now he's doing things like free jumping, being blanketed, getting turned out without his halter, standing pretty still while being groomed, and letting me clean all 4 feet. It seems crazy to think back on just how scared this pony used to be. He truly has come so far. That pony who wanted nothing to do with people is so far gone. Now he always wants to say hello to everyone. Although he still has a long way to go, it's important to remember how far he's come. Over the next few weeks, he'll start working on being cross-tied, wearing the bridle more, and barring no more injuries on my part, he'll hopefully be backed. Good boy, Geronimo. Good boy. Geronimo, that's backwards. Oh my god. Good boy, Geronimo. Seriously? Good boy. Whoa. Whoa, good boy. Good boy. Good boy.